Next, let's clear up Road to Stonewall, monument for LGBTQ plus Holocaust victims vandalized in Berlin. German authorities are investigating whether there is a connection between two arson attacks that were carried out in central Berlin that targeted 3 Holocaust memorials. Among the memorials was one dedicated to the LGBTQ plus people who died during the Nazi regime. Recently, arsonists attempted to burn a monument in Berlin-Tiergarten, dedicated to LGBTQ plus people persecuted under the National Socialist government. An unknown person threw a burning object at the memorial with a note containing a modified version of a Bible verse regarding gay people. The monument, which was erected in 2008, didn't suffer permanent damage. Later that day, a book box at the Gleis 17 or Platform 17 Holocaust Memorial in Grunewald caught fire. A man allegedly set fire to a box inside the former phone booth that serves as a free book exchange location. Firefighters extinguished the flames, but almost all of the books had been destroyed by the fire. In the book box, the majority of the books were about Jewish life in Berlin, Germany during the Nazi era and the persecution of the Jews during that period. We talk a lot about what happened during Hitler's reign and stuff, and then here we see once again, there's been a surge in anti-Semitism around the world. I'm not wearing it tonight, but I've been wearing my Jewish star on a more regular basis now, just because my sister's doing it in New York, because there is so much hate out there, and you want to see things like we're no different than everybody else. It's like the LGBT, we're no different than everyone else, and we all should be treated with respect. What is garnered or gained out of this, other than propaganda, this burning a former phone booth that is now as a book exchange. Like, what do you get by burning the books? I mean, it's like us banning books here in Florida. Like, that doesn't erase history by doing something like that. So I think these are both bad things that are happening just as a small touch on a larger issue that's at hand.
Glenn, I'm curious. The issue of how it affects fascist support in Germany, which is clearly a gigantic issue, and how it reflects in terms of the attacks on LGBTQ community. Here at home, we're reporting this at Queer News Tonight, talking about this is happening in Germany. Mm-hmm. And we think it's important what's happening in Germany as an illustration of what we see happening in the United States. Do you see the connection between anti-Semitism and homophobic attacks? Do you make the connections, or do you think that that's not as clear?
I think I definitely make the connection because, during the Holocaust, not only were Jews put in concentration camps, but I can't remember the exact number, but let's say it was 17 or 50,000 LGBT folks were also segregated, put into Auschwitz and all these other camps.
The Pink Triangle.
The Pink Triangle. And when the Nazis were overthrown, those who were LGBT were not released like all the Jews and everyone else. They were considered still prisoners, and they were still put into prison camps and stuff for being gay. So, there's definitely a connection of this hate, and the hate for the LGBTQ community sustained itself through Europe after the Jews were, the Nazis were suppressed and they freed the Jews. I mean, us as a community were not, able to walk away with your head held high. A lot of them were, other terrible things were done to them just by the fact of who they are.
And for both of you, I'm curious, how does it wash over you that books are under attack in Germany?
It's a very, very sort of poetic, stark parallel, right? When we see, these attacks against, again, it's a freedom of speech issue, it's a freedom of press issue, it's an academic freedom issue, and so when we see the stories of marginalized people quite literally burned, right? We don't, when we're being extra poetic with it, we don't call it book banning, we call it book burning, right? And now we're seeing the literal physical embodiment of that exact practice happening in this phone booth of these stories quite literally being burnt to a crisp is a really, really scary parallel to what we see here in Florida.
Having 2 generations, no offense, of gay Jews at the table, one thing
What are you saying?
Hi, old. One thing that we both can identify with is not only our, sexuality and our, LGBTQ plus families, but also our Jewish heritage and identity that has been affected us throughout our entirety of life. We've been taught the Holocaust, we've been taught about all that. And I don't know about you, but for me later in life is when I learned, oh, queer people were segregated, treated, a little bit, it was also awful and horrible, but a little bit worse with, forced, declothing and intermingling of.
There were a lot of tests and things that were done on gay people that may not have been done on other humans because they treated them as animals, if you will. And that was so severe and disgusting is the best way I can put it.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
I needed that help because it's hard to talk about sometimes. And the fact that we're able to sit here and talk about it with you and all of you is something that I'm very thankful to be able to do today. So thank you.
And
guys.
I think as a Jew, and I'm not a religious Jew. I mean, I grew up in a very Reformed family, but any of our holidays and stuff, it's all about persecution dating back in time to the beginning. It's always about being persecuted in Egypt, is being persecuted like throughout our history. And so, you'd think that's history, but it's not. It's still happening. And so you're still a targeted minority, if you will, at the same time as you blend in with everybody else.
One last thought related to both, actually all three of your observations. It doesn't require the state to be the oppressor like it was in World War II and the camps in Nazi Germany and led by the master plan of Adolf Hitler. Rachel Maddow is continuing at MSNBC to make the observation that since the January 6th riots on the Capitol, that what we've watched over the last 2 years is a motivational change. People have not been able to get a call to action, including Donald Trump, of saying, take to the streets and riot in defense for me about these charges, et cetera, and so on. And Rachel Maddow continues to make the point that it is not a collective attack now that we're watching in America, that we're watching lone terrorists. And that's what happened here. It's an individual that creates a societal fear of burning this phone booth and these books. And what we're watching in the United States, the person in Utah that very actively says, I'm going to kill the president and I'm going to kill the district attorney in New York City because of their opposition to Donald Trump. And I am going to take this action. It's not large groups of hundreds of people that are coming together. It's the lone terrorist. We reported this week of the straight woman who has a business that flies a flag at her business, flies a rainbow flag, who is married and has 9 children. And it so offended the terrorist, he took the gun and shot her on the steps of her business in Lake Arrowhead, California. I think Rachel Maddow is onto something. She has, because of religious understanding that we're talking about right now, and LGBT understanding that we're talking about right now, I think she's onto something that we're watching, like in this example, something that is now again transitioning different in our society. That it's not the Proud Boys that we have to fear. It is the lone gunman.
Well, it's not that we don't fear the Proud Boys. It's easy to figure out who they are. The lone wolf, you don't know who it is amongst us. And that's what's the scary part, because it's harder to identify that individual if they're not on social media or they're just a one-off and there's lots of crazies that never do anything. But it takes that one crazy to do something. We know what the Proud Boys want. It's much easier to watch over them than it is to follow their social media because they have such a large following than it is that lone wolf.
Yeah, very interesting. We are Queer News Tonight, the world's first and only live daily LGBTQ plus evening news show, brought to you from Happening Out Television Network. We operate in the same model of PBS and NPR, but for the LGBTQ plus community. We educate, inform, and entertain by supporting the 10 pillars of our LGBTQ plus community, with more than 100,000 a week watching us on Roku, Apple Television, and other channels. To keep the story going, we accept donations with 100% transparency. Stay updated and live authentically with Queer News Tonight.